Welcome to the Me and Money podcast, where your hosts and certified financial planners, Matt Fizell and Elliott Appel, share their thoughts on hot topics, important concepts, and real-life stories in personal finance. Hear from Matt and Elliott as they share lessons learned in their own financial journeys and those they've witnessed throughout their careers while helping clients. Have a question you'd like to hear discussed on a future episode of the podcast? You can reach out to Matt or Elliott or drop your question at the link listed in the show notes. Before we get to the episode, we'd like to remind you that while both Matt and Elliott are financial planners, they are not your financial planner, and this podcast is only intended for educational purposes. For full disclosures, please be sure to listen to the end of the episode or check out the show notes on your favorite podcast platform. Now, on to the show with your hosts, Matt Fizell and Elliott Appel.
All right, welcome to another episode of the Me and Money podcast. Elliott, how's it going over there?
My energy's dragging a little bit today, Matt, but I'm with it, and we're going to do this.
Little end of the year slump, or
just feeling tired. But how are you?
Yeah, same. It's definitely the busy season of work and personal life. So, I figured why not pick a nice hot topic in the news and talk about 50-year mortgages. That'll wake you up, huh?
Yeah, I mean, it's when you texted me earlier about talking about this, I was like, I'm not quite sure I have fully formed thoughts on this, so I'm excited to flesh this out a little bit.
Yeah. Well, why don't we start with just like a summary of what is going on, and I guess just your first thoughts on it, since it sounds like you haven't had too much time to think about it.
Yeah, I mean, I just caught a social post about, I think, Trump proposing 50-year mortgages. I don't know if there's anything formal, but you tell me. Have you read more about it?
I mean, I think this is kind of like early stages of this. I don't think there's too much to be expanded on there. And of course, with the government somewhat reopened, like, right? I don't know. Who even knows what's going on today while we record this? But I don't foresee this being like a brand new thing tomorrow, right? I think
no way, given that just the legal documents and requirements that go into 30-year mortgages. Yeah, this isn't happening for a while.
Yeah. So, yeah, I don't really have too much more to add about like the news of it. But I'm curious, like when you first saw that headline, what were some of those like initial gut reactions or initial thoughts on it?
Probably words I shouldn't say here.
Do I need to put the explicit tag on this episode?
I think we'll leave it off and I just won't say them. But WTF, I think that's appropriate to say on here. I was just a little bit shocked. I think I get the premise, or at least I think the premise is we want to make homes more affordable. I don't know if this would necessarily have that effect. We could speculate of what that is, but I understand the pain of home affordability, and it's a real struggle today. If you look at any statistic about average age of home buyers, average payments as a percent of gross income, I mean, you look at any of the stats, people are squeezed. So I understand trying to make it more affordable. I don't know if extending a payment out further is going to help with the affordability. If anything, I think that might drive up prices in the short term and maybe the long term as well. Because it makes it more affordable. It's kind of like when interest rates went down in the past year. Well, people all of a sudden flooded back to the market because they could go afford those houses. So I have some concerns about that, but I'm curious your take.
Yeah, no, I am very much in the same boat as you on this one. I think, again, in spirit, maybe it's a good idea, but spirit and practicality and the actual like application of said thing are very different. I guess the cynic in me says, oh, great. Like, more money for the banks, right? Because they're going to be making more interest with a longer time horizon. I think what's really interesting too is, are these going to have the same interest rate as the 30-year, or, there's already at times
what usually higher, right?
For sure. I mean, you'd think so. And we can get more into that in a second. But, it's like, okay, so if we're going to be charging a higher interest rate, I mean, what's the spread usually between 15 and 30? Like a point and a half of interest?
hits. Not much.
Yeah. I mean, but still, that's even at 6%, right? That's a 25% higher rate, right? So are we going to see that times 2? Like, I don't know. What is that spread going to be? And so when you really start running the numbers, it's like, okay, how much money are they actually going to save? So I think that's interesting. Second, right, I would agree with you on the pricing. I think we have more of a housing building crisis than a housing affordability crisis. I think it's more of a supply driven issue than a demand. So I don't, right? It's not like longer mortgages are going to start printing houses everywhere, right? So not really going to solve that problem. And I would tend to agree with you. Like, I think it's just going to mean more payments for longer. And I think my biggest fear is, people will just go buy more house than they already don't need. And we see this a lot in the car market, right? There's, there didn't used to be 84-month car payments, and we have those now. And now you look at the average purchase price of a vehicle and it's north of $50,000. So I think that this is, again, I think it's a decent idea in spirit, but I see the reality of human behavior, and that's going to mean, oh, well, I used to be able to afford a $500,000 house. Now I can afford a $750,000 house. So I'm going to get the $750,000 house.
Yeah. It feels a little like someone got their leg cut off and we're going to slap a Band-Aid on it, as opposed to trying to figure out how to get like a real prosthetic and solve the issue of walking again. For a rather crude sort of thing. I think you've hit on it. There are a lot of different policy decisions that could be made to help alleviate the problem, maybe not solve it entirely, as opposed to just extending out. And in tandem with the car loan, as you were saying that, the other thing that comes to mind for me is the equity in the house. If you have a 50-year loan, you go out and buy a house, and let's say 5 years later you have to move, or even 7 years later, how much equity are you actually going to have in that house at the end of 5 or 7 years? I haven't looked at an amortization table, but I can tell you there's not going to be much, because there's not a lot on a 30-year loan, in which case, like, can you actually sell the house? You may not be able to in 5 or 7 years. I mean, I don't know what the price appreciation is and what the break even is, but I would suspect you have to stay there a lot longer to be able to sell it, to cover commissions and taxes and everything else that go through that.
Yeah. And I'd be really curious too, like what, I think it'd be fascinating to hear like what a bank would say about something like this, right? Because I feel like even on a 30-year obligation, like they're going to probably get refinanced at some point, right? In a 30-year time horizon. Like, so how are they going to price that into this lending product, right? Because if there is that refinance risk, you would assume, like you said, they're probably going to want a higher interest rate, and who knows, like maybe there's some other weird rules that come into that, right? I don't know. Like, I'm just thinking out loud here, like maybe you can only refinance after 10 or 15 years, like to make sure that they're, getting their money, which they need so desperately, I know. But I don't know. It's things like that where I feel like 30 years is already a really long time, but 50 years is, I mean, that's almost a certainty that what happens at the start of that loan is not going to be the same at the end of that loan. And I think my other largest concern would just be, a lot of times the real value of having a house is having it paid off when you're retired, right? I think this maybe creates more of a problem where there's just no way people are going to have those mortgages paid off by the time they're retired. I mean, think about it, right?
Yeah.
Like if you're retiring at 70 and you take out this mortgage at 20, like,
or take it out at 40, you're 90 by the time.
I was giving the more extreme case, sure, right? Yeah. Like how many 20-year-olds are out there buying houses, right? Not too many. So yeah, I don't know. I think it's going to be interesting to hear the sides of who's for this and against it and why.
I would speculate, and this is 100% pure speculation. I don't think this happens. I don't know I don't know who's going to jump on board and support this immediately, but I could be totally wrong, and we could be listening to this a year from now, and maybe I am, but I just have a feeling this goes nowhere. I think there's a lot of things that haven't been addressed or could be addressed through this, but I still think there needs to be some policy decisions around housing affordability.
Yeah. Yeah. So like if you were going to solve the issue, like I know, again, we're not politicians here, so it doesn't necessarily have to be like feasible, but it's an honest question. And I had a similar question from, a financial planner at a conference last year. They're like, well, if you could solve Social Security, how would you solve it? So I'm just curious, like,
Social Security is a lot easier. I'd rather have that question. I'll play along though. And I will say, like, I'm not an economist. I don't think I'm necessarily educated enough to address this. I've studied it a little bit, but not in depth. But I think one we hit on already, building. Be able to actually build in places where historically you can't because of building codes, whether right or wrong with the building code. But if you're able to build more, theoretically higher supply should bring down the prices a little bit, assuming demand doesn't go up as much with it. You've seen other countries address foreign buyers, and I don't know what percent of that market is, but people essentially parking cash in a house. They've removed foreign investors from doing that by imposing a tax. So you could do, I'm not saying this is the right way to do it, but that is a possible policy solution of making sure buildings are actually used, not sitting empty or only used once a year. That's another way to do that. Those are the ones that come immediately to mind, and really just building is the main one. I think what gets quoted a lot is large institutional investors buying single family homes. And yes, that's happened, but from my understanding, it's still a fairly small part of the market. So I don't necessarily know if that's driving overall nationwide. I think in certain areas it is, in which case, if you wanted to, you can make a policy decision around not owning more than X percentage of the homes, or, whatever that is. There's different creative ways. And again, I don't know how all this plays out, but I think a lot of the proposals that get thrown around, like, that, they don't work. They sound nice to constituents to get politicians elected, but if you read any sort of research on it, most people will agree those solutions don't work.
Right. So yeah, there's a big disconnect, right, between economic theory and policy theory than us humans like actually functioning inside of that system.
Yeah. How would you do it?
Yeah, I was gonna go the institutional buyer route as well. I think I have a slightly different view on it. I would agree with you. I don't think it's like catastrophically damaging the housing market. But I don't know, like, let's be real, right? Like, what is the purpose of a single family home? Right? It's for a single family. Now, do we need to go put like this sweeping legislation in place to say that an LLC can't own, a single family house? Like, probably not, because, right, you're going to have, maybe some rental companies get pissed about that. How do you then determine what trust is and isn't eligible to hold a single family house? There's a lot more issue with that, and I think complication and nuance that could really make things messy for a lot of people. But I think something along those lines needs to be done, where I don't know that it needs to be so far as like more Section 9 housing, like, because there's a lot of, again, good theory, but how is it actually being carried out? But I honestly think we just need to build more starter homes. Like, there's a really good book out there called Strong Towns. I don't know if I've ever suggested that one to you.
No.
But it's from a former city planner in Bemidji, Minnesota. And so I don't know if you know where Bemidji is, but it's kind of like central Minnesota, real small town. Like, it's not a huge metropolis by any means. But, he talks a lot in that book how everything that we buy now is built to what he calls a finished state, right? So, right, you have these small lots and these subdivisions. You're building as far as you possibly can to give this, the smallest yard possible that someone would still want. There's no room for that house to grow. There's really no upgrades that can be done to that house because you've already maxed out the lot size. Like typically if you're doing that, you're going to finish the house decently or as well as you can to get the most money out of the house that these spec builders can get.
Yeah.
And there's not really what our parents and our grandparents had. There's not the ranch, the small 3-bedroom ranch house on a half acre or 3/4 acre lot that you can add on to. And I think in doing that, it's just made the cost of entry a lot higher, right? So unless you can afford your finisher house, right? And I say that lightly because you'll just go find a bigger house at some point anyways, or a nicer house, or but there's just really not that style of property being built anymore. And I think that creates affordability issues as well, right? There's not really the true starter home that you buy and then, 10 years later do upgrades. Like everything's built to be the granite countertops and the nice cabinetry and insert feature that people want, right? Like there's not really a lot of buying and then doing the elbow grease equity work to improve that property because it's been fully improved.
How does that work with the premise of building more? Because in your example, right, if you're smaller house on smaller lot, more building, more homes, more supply versus, we're essentially instead of 2 houses, we get 1 in your example.
Mm-hmm.
Right? How does that work with affordability? Like, does the book address that?
So you're saying like in terms of lot size or?
Just because if we're talking about building more to lower the cost, right? In your example with the suburb, like instead of that 3/4 lot, we divide that lot, we put 2 homes on it as opposed to 1. How does that work if we go back to now we have the 3/4 lot with the smaller home people can add on to, but we have 1 fewer house?
Got it. I mean, you'd obviously need more land, right? Like to do this, but I think when you look at how do these real estate developers, I'm just going to pick on Viridian. I'm not saying they're the only one doing that. Viridian's a home builder here at Madison, right? They buy the land, they squeeze as many houses as they can into that land to extract the most value from that area of land that they're developing, right? So again, now they kind of have a control on the market price of those houses and what they're going to sell. Well, if you're going to build a house there, you might as well build the most expensive house that you can to get the most return out of your land, right? So I think that's again, I'm not picking on Viridian. I'm just using them as a tangible example.
Insert home builder name here.
Yeah.
Anywhere in the US.
But that's how it is. Like there's not really an incentive for them to build lower priced homes or entry level homes that could be expanded in the future. And that's not how towns were built, right? We didn't have, I'm sure you probably had some speculative builders even back then, but towns slowly expanded from a city center over time, where now it's, hey, let's go build all this infrastructure. Let's build new roads and put new, pipes under there and new sewer and more maintenance. And that's a whole nother aspect of this book that we're not going to get into. But, how do these builders put a lot of pressure on cities? And you're seeing that across the country where local governments, what do they have to do, right? They have to keep jacking up property taxes to take care of this infrastructure that they gave a good deal to the builder to, attract development and housing starts. So, but yeah, I don't know. I don't think my solution's a perfect one, but I'm just saying that in the grand scheme of things, there isn't really a starter home anymore. Just as when you go to the car dealer, right? The base model doesn't exist anymore. There's not stick shifts with crank windows and manual locks, right? And millennials are like, what the hell is that, right? But now everything has a computer in it. Everything has power seats and heated seats and all these things. And there's not really a starter car anymore either. So I think that's more of a societal trend that I've noticed. But yeah,
for sure.
A starter home nowadays is a $500,000 house with
it's 2,000 square feet as opposed to 1,300 square feet.
Right. And everything's really nice. Not saying that we can't have nice things, but I think there's a lot of 20-year-olds out there who would be fine with, like laminate countertops.
Sure.
If they could buy a house and they don't need 2,400 square feet when it's just them being single and starting their lives, right? Not that they could afford that anyways with all their student loans. So there's a lot of interlinked issues, but I just thought that was a really interesting point in that book where they're just not building starter homes anymore.
Yeah. I also wonder about public infrastructure of just like if we had better public transportation, could you build out and still make commutes palatable, right? And like having lived in Seattle, which has okay-ish infrastructure, not good compared to the East Coast, but certainly better than the Midwest. And then when I've been to New York or DC, hopping on their public transport, like you can get very far for very cheaply on time most of the time compared to definitely out here and even in Seattle. So I think that would help with some of the building, but obviously you have to have the funds to pay for that.
Well, I think too that would at the same time make housing more affordable. If not every family needed a car to get to work, well, I mean now, especially when you look at average car payments being $600, $700, $800 a month, which is mind blowing to me. I mean that goes a long ways towards being able to pay a 30-year mortgage, and then you don't need a 50-year mortgage product, right? So
yeah,
I think you'll really like that book. And it touches on those issues that you just talked about where, a lot of like older countries and older cities globally, right? They start as a center, and as they grow, like there's just more of the same goods and services that grow into these additional rings of the city as it continues to grow. Whereas we do, a big downtown development, and then we decide we're going to go build some spec homes 15 miles from here. And then we have to build, shopping centers and grocery stores. And I think you'll really like it. And it's just a really interesting take on like the housing affordability crisis.
Yeah. So for viewers, what's the name of the book again, Matt?
It's called Strong Towns.
Okay. Strong Towns.
The name of the author is slipping in my mind right now, but really good book. Interesting. Maybe a little bit like some of his ideas may seem a little conspiracy-esque, but I don't.
Now we throw in the disclaimer. Looks like it's by Charles Marhone Jr. Probably mispronouncing that.
I'll just give it a look here.
Okay.
Yes. Yep. So It's called Strong Towns, a bottom-up revolution to rebuild American prosperity. Great book. Really interesting. He's from the Midwest, so he's not a conspiracy guy. I'll just go ahead and say that. But just a good blue-collar dude, from what I can tell.
Fair enough. Any other thoughts on the 50-year mortgage?
No, it's going to be interesting. I'm not really a big fan of giving people more time to get themselves in debt. I think that's a dangerous proposition, as the buy now, pay later fallout is showing us. But how about you? Any final thoughts?
I think if this product existed a few years ago and rates were as low as they were, I personally may have been interested in this. Am I interested in it at this point? No, but I'll sort of give that caveat that in that weird world, I don't know, 50-year debt, people were locking in 30-year rates around, call it 2%. So I don't know, maybe you're at 2.75 for 50 years. Just a guess. I don't know, but that would have been interesting.
Yeah, that would have been interesting. But can you imagine the clamor to buy a house if that were the case? It'd be like Black Friday for houses. Like
maybe a new policy decision, Matt. I'm joking.
All right. Well, good chatting with you as always, Elliott.
All right.
I guess we'll see what happens.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Me and Money podcast. We hope you enjoyed the show. Have a question you'd like to suggest for a future episode? Drop Matt or Elliott a question at their email or use the linked form in the show notes. Like what you heard? It would be a tremendous help to us in our mission of having real conversations about personal finance by leaving us a review on your favorite podcast app. A few words can go a long way in connecting those looking for content like ours on their app of choice. You can also support the show by liking, sharing, and subscribing. Thanks again for listening, and be on the lookout for future episodes soon.
The Me and Money podcast is hosted and produced by Harmony Outsourcing Services LLC. Matt Fizell is an investment advisor representative of Harmony Wealth L.L.C. Elliott Appel is an investment advisor representative of Kindness Financial Planning LLC. However, the views and opinions expressed by Matt and Elliott in this podcast are not intended as individualized investment advice on behalf of Harmony or Kindness, or as tax, accounting, or legal advice. Although we gather information from sources that we deem to be reliable, we cannot guarantee the accuracy, timeliness, or completeness of any information prepared by any unaffiliated third party. When specific investments or types of investments are mentioned, such mention is not intended to be a recommendation or endorsement to buy or sell the specific investment. Harmony is a registered investment advisor authorized to do business in the states of Wisconsin and Texas and other jurisdictions where exempted. Kindness is a registered investment advisor authorized to do business in Wisconsin and Washington and in other jurisdictions where exempted. Registration as a registered investment advisor does not imply a certain level of skill or training. This website contains links to the Harmony and Kindness websites that provide general information about the advisory services offered by Harmony and Kindness. These links are provided as a convenience only. Harmony and Kindness can only provide individualized services after you sign an agreement and receive required disclosures. Users of this website may, but are not required to, engage the services of Harmony or Kindness for advisory services. Please remember that all investments involve varying degrees of risk, and the future performance of any specific investment or investment strategy is not guaranteed to be profitable or equal to any historical performances. As a final note, we'd encourage you to reach out to your financial professionals before implementing any of the strategies or concepts discussed in this podcast. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time.